Hello and welcome to this very special edition of the National Debate. Viewers, Trump team's anti-India rhetoric is in full force, and this time it's extremely sharp. Today, a fact check has come in from the United States for the U.S. President. Donald Trump's Commerce Secretary has said that a trade deal between India and U.S. could not be finalized because Prime Minister Modi refused to dial President Trump. No ego-stoking, no curtsy theatre. In fact, the assertion has, in one fell swoop, exposed not just Trump's convenient fabrication of facts, but also, we are not to forget that after Venezuela, the U.S. radar has been widening. Several countries are now in Washington's crosshairs. From Iran to Cuba, long-time geopolitical foes to China, Russia, North Korea, where tensions are flaring again. Closer allies like India. We've even seen the case of Turkey, who haven't been spared either, who have been facing criticism over trade, military deals and energy ties. As Trump-era posturing resurfaces, the big question is, who's next in line for pressure?
Prime Minister Modi came to see me. Sir, may I see you, please? Yes, I have a very good relationship with him. He's not that happy with me because, you know, they're paying a lot of tariffs now.
India and the United States were committed to negotiating a bilateral trade agreement with the US as far back as 13th of February last year, that is. On several occasions, we have been close to a deal. The characterization of these discussions in the reported remarks is not accurate. Incidentally, Prime Minister and President Trump have also spoken on phone on 8 occasions during 2025, covering different aspects of our wide-ranging partnership.
So what really are the implications of what really is going on? Let's quickly listen into these two statements and how what President Trump has said and what Howard Lutnick has said are really statements that are contradicting each other. Let's quickly take a look at what really has been stated. Here is a statement of President Donald Trump where he has gone on to say that Modi called saying, "Sir, may I see you please?" Howard Lutnick's statement today, of course, comes out to say that there's no trade deal because Modi didn't call. So which one of these two are factually correct? Both certainly cannot be. Let's look at the next contradiction in these two statements that have come in. That we share a good relationship with Modi. They were uncomfortable doing it and therefore Modi didn't call. So do they have a good relationship or are they uncomfortable? Both, again, certainly cannot be true. Let's look at the third contradiction, what has been stated. US and India are continuing the trade negotiations. Others have negotiated faster. India has missed the window and therefore he called up to say that the tariff has gone up, is what Howard Lutnick says. India has cut down on Russian oil and therefore listening to what we are saying is what President Trump had sought to convey. Certainly, both these statements are in direct contradiction with each other. Is this just a classical strategy of playing good cop, bad cop? We don't know, but we'll certainly be debating that. What has the Indian government's response been? We have seen the response saying that we have seen the remarks coming in when it comes to Howard Lutnick. Characterization has not been right. Prime Minister Modi and Trump spoke 8 times last year, is what the government of India is saying. Many rounds of trade talks have been held, is what has been stated by the government. They want a balanced trade agreement, is what has been stated by the government of India. So this is the response coming in from India. Let's quickly open this up and take it across to our guests who are joining us, of course, who are joining us at the moment. We have with us Sushant Sareen, who is fellow of the ORF. We have Ashok Sajanar, former diplomat, joining us. Dr. Sergei Markov is former advisor to President Putin. We have Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Grant, former advisor to Ukraine's defense minister. Mikhail Rung-Olsen is a senior researcher at the Danish Institute for International Studies. Adel Nazarian is a foreign policy analyst. Shane Trijo is a campaign lead of the Third Term Project. We have Angie Wong, Miami GOP committee woman. Let me start with Adel Nazarian. Adel Nazarian, which of these statements are true? Because what President Trump is saying and what Howard Lutnick is saying are completely contradictory.
So great to be on with you. The situation isn't about blaming who's versus who. It's not about missed phone calls or personalities. It's about how America chooses to lead in a multipolar world. And under President Trump, trade is treated as a transactional power play and from a very corporate standpoint, but not from the perspective of strategic alignment. He wants to see deals that are fast, highly visible, and framed as U.S. wins, which is why Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines were rewarded for moving so quickly. Meanwhile, you have to understand also the perspective of India. that sees things as, they have red lines, as any sovereign nation does. And there has to be a level of understanding as to how, certain countries are going to want to build more on the fact that they have this long-lasting relationships. And so it's all a matter of miscommunication, talking past each other, and both countries having their own red lines is how they want to do things.
All right, let me bring in Ashok Sajjanar on that note. Is this just about miscommunication? Is this a good cop, bad cop strategy? Or is it just blatant lies that are being touted out, coming out from senior leaders? And that's something that, while the government of India has been extremely restrained, in terms of its own public positioning, we've seen insult after insult coming in from the United States. Ashok Sajjanar.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madhav, for having me. I don't think it's a good cop, bad cop. I think it's a bad cop, bad cop. Both of them are bad cop because both of them are trying to put pressure on India to change. And India wants a fair, balanced agreement between the two sides. What the United States is interested in is a zero-sum game. We want a win-win solution. The United States wants a zero-sum game that all the wins should be projected as the United States, and India should be the one who should be subservient. Unfortunately, those are the sort of agreements that the United States has been able to get so far, whether it is from its allies and partners like EU, like Japan, like Republic of Korea, or for that matter, even from the developing countries, whether it's Indonesia or it is Vietnam. They get, United States imposes 19% tariff on Indonesian products, and United States says it has got a free access to the Indonesian market. These are the sort of things that will not work with India. India has said it should be, we are looking at a mini bilateral trade agreement. It's a step-by-step process, and we want a balanced agreement. That is something that Mr. Trump wants to go back, thumping his chest, saying that I have won, I have opened. That sort of a thing doesn't work with India. India has said what are its red lines, and we'll negotiate on that basis. The last point I want to make, Madhav, is this.
Right.
That notwithstanding these 50% tariffs that the United States has imposed on Indian goods since August of last year, Indian exports to the United States have increased by $9 billion. It is the resilience of the Indian economy, Indian trade.
Okay.
And India's exports to the diversified markets like UK, like ASEAN, like other countries, textiles and other things, they are improving. So
Right.
I think it's both countries need each other, and I think it'll be good
Well,
for
the
the
proof
United
is in the
States to
numbers, and
recognize
Mr.
this.
Sajjanar, because India's GDP projections have only risen. They've not actually fallen after these tariffs have come in, because it's such a small percentage of India's GDP, because India's economy is essentially domestic demand driven. But let me get into Shane Trejo. The simple point that I want to make over here is that Howard Lutnick says that India's deal was supposed to be announced right after the US-UK deal on May 8th. But that's exactly when India was involved in a conflict with Pakistan as far as Operational Sindoor is concerned. So is this a very clear admission that the United States tried to weaponize or take advantage of that conflict through this trade deal and put pressure on India?
My thought is, there's obviously a lot of gamesmanship that's going on right now. I think that at a certain point, the U.S. and India will come together on a good trade deal. President Trump and Prime Minister Modi are like-minded nationalist leaders. Trump expressed his deep appreciation for their friendship, throughout his first term in office. And when you look at, what Trump's focus clearly is, it's on the threat of China. That's the number one threat. So that's combating Chinese influence is a priority, and that's why the alliance with India is so important. And I think it's important for the Trump administration, and strong U.S.-India ties are more important than ever. Also have a lot of things in common in terms of the threats that we're dealing with. The United States has recently endured a ISIS terrorist plot in North Carolina on New Year's Day. We're seeing Islamic terror rise throughout our country. And, that's something that, India's obviously had a problem with too. So we have a lot of shared common goals. Trump and Modi are planning to meet soon at the upcoming Quad Summit.
No, I
so
completely
I think
agree with you. The areas of convergence, there's no doubt, Shane. What you're saying is absolutely true. Strategically, it all makes sense in theory. But the point is, we've seen so many, statements come in, and just not this week. We've seen Peter Navarro talk about, all sorts of statements saying the Brahmins are profiteering. There have been multiple such statements coming in ever since the trade negotiations began, which is what is leading many to wonder what exactly is the US doing. It's one thing to play hardball, to have a bargaining position that's very hard, but the kind of statements and rhetoric coming in are extremely disparaging, diplomatically speaking, and that's something you don't do with a country that considers US as a friend.
I would say that, President Trump's unorthodox diplomacy has yielded a lot of good things, not just for America, but for the world. So again, I think there's the gamesmanship that's going on. It's very easy to get bogged down in the details as these sort of political things are happening. But at the end of the day, I think it will come out well, and that's what we've seen from President Trump is if the rhetoric might be a little bit coarse. In the long run, it'll turn out well.
Okay.
Despite the bumps along the way.
Let's get a response to that. Shashank Serene, is this just coarse rhetoric? Is this a deliberate strategy? Is this a complete absence of a strategy and trying to wing it every day? Waking up to a new set of statements that many would consider unpalatable. Is it the frustration with what's happening in other domains that's leading Trump to make these sort of statements? What really is going on?
Madhav, one, I think you are asking me to read Donald Trump's mind, which I don't think anybody in the world has been able to do. So I can't answer that part of your question. But I think I agree with some points which the person who spoke before me made. Look, yes, on paper at least we have shared goals, right? We have shared threats. We have many convergences, or at least we thought we had. But I'm not so sure anymore, because I don't think this is just simply about trade anymore. Because if it was about trade, we have it from US negotiators themselves, who said that India has been far more flexible than what they imagined India ever to be. So we have been very keen on a trade deal. The problem has been that the Americans, the kind of trade deal they want is a 19th century kind of a trade deal in which the colonial power decides all the terms of trade, and the colonized power is only there as a supplicant and only there as a provider. Now, this kind of a colonial model of trade, maybe it works with some of the other countries. It doesn't work with India, because we've suffered, that particular kind of a trade relationship in the past. Second, look, you are in a diplomatic world. If you want to really say that the big threat is China and that you want to have a containment strategy, then it simply doesn't make sense for you to be, targeting countries which have been your friends, maybe not allies, but who are your partners, who are ready to work with you, who are ready to pull their own weight, who don't depend, unlike Europe, for example. India does not depend upon American weapons, American, boots on the ground, American systems, nothing. We are saying that we will stand on our own 2 feet, and yet, you treat us as though we are some kind of an adversary. China buys more oil than India, but you impose sanctions on India. These are not tariffs; these are sanctions on India. So, as an Indian, what do you think I'm expected to think? And then the problem is that, if the Americans are entitled, and I don't grudge them that, if they are entitled and they feel entitled that they need to have a relationship with India's enemies, in particular Pakistan, which is a terrorist sponsoring state, those ISIS terrorists and all are believed to have their camps in Pakistan, and are allowed to operate in Pakistan. And every time the Pakistanis want to get close to the Americans, earlier they used to hand over an Al-Qaeda guy every time a big visit was taking place. Right. Nowadays, they hand over an ISIS guy, right? Now, okay, you want to have a relationship with them despite having been shafted for 20 years when you were in Afghanistan. Yeah. Go ahead, have a relationship with them. But we also have a relationship with the Russians, which is an important relationship for us.
Yeah,
and
I'm going to come to I'm going to come to that Russian point because that's the next talking point. It's a very, very important one because clearly the entire talk, the entire rhetoric is surrounding purchase of oil from Russia. But let me get a quick response from Angie Wong to the point that you made regarding, the entire trade deal. The impression that Sushant gets and many here in India have is that perhaps US wants to get a lot more out of this deal. But that's something that India will not accept. You certainly can't be treating India as a vassal state. We are a big country, we are a mature democracy, and the relations between the two countries have been on the mend for the last 2.5 decades. We surely don't want to risk that, Angie Wong.
Yeah, and who cares if it was 8 phone calls or 20 phone calls that were made? Your Ministry of External Affairs can pick up the phone and call Howard Lutnick and start the conversations all over again. That's what this is about. Who wins on this? Nobody. So if there's going to be U.S.-India relations, you got to start talking. It doesn't matter about the tauntings or if you don't like the language or the lexicon coming from the Trump camp. Who cares? If you want India to prosper and you want the U.S. economy to help along with that, well, then make the phone call. It's like babies, right? Talking here. So I'm just curious.
Angie, here's where things become a bit complicated. Let me just come in here. The problem is the dates that he's talking about is when India was engaged in a conflict with Pakistan. So it's very clear from the words, from Lutnick's own words, that they were trying to leverage that conflict to get a better trade deal. And when India was engaged in that conflict and they came back 3 weeks later, they said, look here, the goalpost is now shifted. Now those tariff deals have gone. You have to pay higher tariffs now. What is that if it's not, trying to arm twist India into taking a trade deal that's perhaps more loaded towards the US's side?
Yeah, and that's a timeline that maybe you're more sensitive to. Howard Lutnick clearly said that he was making deals with Vietnam and Indonesia, and that's what his timeline was. Whatever it is, we are now in January 2026. If you want to make a deal can be made. President Trump's waiting for a phone call. Look, if you don't like that, we know now from covering this whole entire trade deal since 2025 that President Trump
which one is it? But which one is it? We still don't know. The problem is Lutnick says that, no, this is exactly the problem. Lutnick says that Modi didn't call him. President Trump says that Modi said, sir, I want to speak to you. Who do we believe? Your president or your secretary?
And I'm saying, why does it matter at this point?
Of course it matters.
Who calls and who doesn't?
You can't insult a head of state or a head of government.
Okay. Well, again,
that's how diplomacy works, ma'am.
You make the call. That's all. We're now past this point of who didn't call who. This is.
Let me just bring in Mr. Sajanar. Mr. Sajanar, is it just such, is it such a plain vanilla solution? Just make a call, everything will be resolved. Because there's so much of confusion. I don't know if it's a deliberate strategy. I don't know if there's confusion within the United States itself as to how they want to deal with this. But the point is there are so many conflicting statements that are coming out and contradictions that are quite apparent out in the open. Would you like to respond to Angie Wong who says, no, it's very simple. Just make a call and it's all sorted.
I don't want to respond to the lady because I don't think, she really is saying anything that is coherent as far as I'm concerned. But I think what really we need to do is, as one of the speakers said, as Shane said, that,
Let's go one by one, please. Yeah, one by one, yeah.
Both sides need each other. India needs the United States needs India. It's a win-win agreement. We have been working on this for the last 25 years. It has come to this stage. There are a large, whether it is cooperation as far as counterterrorism is concerned, whether it is trade is concerned, we have been moving up in terms of security, in terms of Indo-Pacific. There are so many. So it cannot be a one-sided agreement. So I think that is what we need to focus on. As I said right at the beginning, trying to find sense into what either Mr. Lutnick has said or Mr. Trump has said. I don't think it leads us anywhere. We know for a fact that by June, July, there was a final agreement that had been reached between both the sides that was on Mr. Trump's table. And for an absolutely different subject, which we haven't touched upon as yet, because Mr. Trump claims that he was the one who was instrumental in getting a cessation of hostilities, a ceasefire between India and Pakistan. And that really entitled him to a Nobel Peace Prize. This was not something that India was happy with, what comfortable with,
Yeah.
and that is what has led to. It is not about trade.
Absolutely,
At all.
and that's why this whole timing becomes extremely controversial, because we're talking in the context of Operation Sindoor. But let me just come back to you in a moment. Let me quickly open this up to the next talking point, and this is what we're talking about in relation to the next issue, because really it's also about other aspects. Let's quickly bring in the next set of graphics up on the screen. If I can request my production team to quickly do that, because this is what we're talking about. We're talking about a 500% tariff proposal. This is a proposal to impose these tariffs on Russian oil buyers. The aim is to punish countries which are allegedly fueling Putin's war machine. The concern is that Russian sanctions bill gets the green signal from Trump, and of course there is believed to be bipartisan support for such a bill that has been proposed. Let's take a look at this. 50% to 500%. Is that something that's really possible? Indian exports to the US are $75 billion annually. And of course, India is the largest, US is the largest export market for India. There's also the fact that in August of 2025, US has imposed a 50% tariff on India. As we all very well know, Russian oil imports at a 3-year low at 1.2 billion barrels per day in December 2025. There's also the fact that the share of exports in India's GDP was at 21.2%. That's, of course, in the year 2024. US-bound exports, however, just 2.2% of India's GDP, and there are several segments that are exempt from this as well. India's ducked the Trump tariff bouncers, and India's GDP projection stands at 7.4%, which has actually grown despite the tariffs that have been imposed. Let's take also a look at some of the other statements made. Did India indeed order 68 Apaches, as President Trump has insisted? Phase 1, India had 22 Apaches ordered for the Indian Air Force. Phase 2 had 6 Apaches ordered for the Indian Army Aviation Corps. So in reality, there were just 28 Apaches ordered. Trump has claimed that India has ordered 68 Apaches from the United States. So a bit of a fact check there. But why was there a delay? The delay was largely due to COVID, due to manufacturing issues. And of course, these are details of the deals that were signed in September 2015 and February 2020. And let's quickly get the next set of graphics up on the screen. The value, of course, of those deals that are present over there. The delays, of course, were on account of manufacturing delays. Let's quickly bring in our Russian panelists as well. Mr. Sergey, would you like to comment on this? Because ultimately, the bid to bring in this 500% tariff will impact those countries that are importing oil from Russia. How does Russia look at this? Because clearly, this is an attempt to dissuade countries from purchasing oil from Russia. What is Russia's strategy to deal with this?
First of all, with Donald Trump, everything possible, we understand, because his policy not so clear strategy outline. It's first. Secondly, it's clear that Donald Trump wants to create some kind of weaponry to make more political and economic pressure against Russia. Probably Donald Trump didn't read history textbooks in the school well enough. If he read, he knows that Russia deny any pressure. Russia crashed all, big leaders who pretend to be leader of the global world. Adolf Hitler, Napoleon Bonaparte, and others have been crashed by Russia.
But beyond history, let's get down to the basics. What are you going to do in this situation now?
In this situation, we will wait. As we understand, this is not decision of Donald Trump yet. It is probably law will be accepted by Congress of the United States. But in this law, Donald Trump made pressure to have very big change. Previous law was that U.S. President must impose sanctions. Now this law saying that President of the United States can impose such kind of sanctions. And so it will be decision of Donald Trump. Either Donald Trump will make this decision or not, I think more realistically not. Because he understands that India and China, they're great country civilization. It's impossible to treat them as some kind of semi-colony. And India and also China will defend own sovereignty. And if United States want to open trade war against India, we're absolutely sure that India's response will be very clear.
Okay, let me get in Glenn Grant on that. Glenn Grant, I want you to respond to that. How much of this strategy is really going to work? Bringing in this 500% tariff, it's a big threat. The point is, will it ultimately happen on ground? And there's been a lot of rhetoric surrounding increasing of tariffs, so on and so forth. But the larger question is this. Russia can always bring in, other ways in which to export oil, perhaps through other companies or other outlets. So you bring in a law and they'll bring in a way to bypass it. How much of this is actually going to work on ground, Glenn Grant?
To be blunt, I think very little. I think this is really complex, and it's almost funny actually in its ridiculousness. And I think that each of the speakers has brought something to it that is right, and some of them, maybe not as right as they think it might be. But I mean, you can't trust what Trump is going to do. We all know that. That's as it is. And he pitches high when he starts. So 500 is his opening gambit. He's gambling. And so it's going to come down. It's going to come down with a bit of common sense and argument. But there's two things in there. One is clearly US and the people that are talking to him are still unhappy about India actually, in effect, breaking sanctions on Russian oil. And that, Trump likes, when he says, I want sanctions, he expects people to follow them. I'm not going to go into sovereignty. I'm just merely saying that that's what he expects. So if someone doesn't, it makes him cross. Look, the commercial minister, I suspect, is trying as much as possible to get on the right side of Trump. So I wouldn't listen too much to what he says at all. Right. Because it's a gambling in and out. And then the last thing is Trump wants to sell American weapons to India. He does not want there's two reasons. One, he wants India to have weapons that work, because if you're going to have to fight China, you're not going to manage that with Russian weapons because they don't work. And the second thing is it's good money for America. So I will finish with one last bit. You've got an ambassador in America. What the hell is that person doing? They're not doing their job. India, you need to change the ambassador and get someone who can get in.
Okay, that's a very, very controversial line. Sushant Sareen, would you like to respond to that? Because there's a lot over there. In fact, I want to take some of those questions to American guests as well. But Sushant, would you like to answer Glenn when he makes a question about Indian diplomacy?
Yeah, I think Indian diplomacy can do much better. I think we were under the impression that it's all going to be very hunky-dory with the Trump administration. And clearly we did not read the signs when we should have. So yes, I blame the Indian embassy out there as being very lazy. And yes, if you can bring about some changes in the embassy out there, we might be better off for it. On that point, I agree. Secondly, the problem I have is a couple of issues. One, on weapons. Look, we were already buying American weapons. We had started moving towards the American weapon market in quite a big and significant way. Right. But today, as somebody who has for long been an advocate of US-India relations, I am doubtful whether I should buy any weapons from the Americans because I don't think they are reliable anymore. I find the Russians, despite their closeness to China, far more reliable than I find the Americans. Because tomorrow they'll tell me I can't use the weapons in one place, I can't use the weapons in some other place. So I don't want to be held hostage to weapons that I buy from the Americans. Thirdly, and more importantly, look, this particular bill, if they actually were to bring about 500%, it could be 500%, it could be 50,000%. That's an academic figure. You can't have any trade at those numbers, right? But the point is that every time the Americans bring a bill like this, there is a clause which allows for waivers. Now, I don't see how they bring a bill like this of 500% and also impose it on the Chinese. Because then the Americans, and we know that the Americans have already kowtowed to the Chinese. Okay. They cannot levy those kind of tariffs on the Chinese. So they will have waiver clauses. What I suspect is that if a bill like this was to pass from Congress, what they will do is that they will hold it in abeyance They will not impose it, but keep that sword hanging over
And
India's
I think
head.
it mentions up to 500%. So I think they've kept that much leverage with themselves as to how much of it they're going to impose and how much they won't. But Adele, you're smiling. Many questions I think you want to answer. But the point that, I want to make is just this, that whatever Glenn may say about the quality of weapons, etc., I'm not getting into. The fact that US has to realize, as Sushant has very specifically mentioned, that in terms of the percentage, in terms of the purchases, India has slowly been moving towards the US. But there is a legacy, and a decades-long legacy where over 50% of our defense hardware is actually Russian. You can't expect us to suddenly wish that all away, and therefore there is a sensitivity that has to be kept in mind from the part of the United States when you look at those changes that happen. You can't just expect the army to suddenly change all its hardware overnight. And that's where the problem arises in terms of the lack of understanding of the specific situations that countries like India and perhaps even others might have on part of those who are in power in Washington.
Look, and certainly those weapons that are going to be deemed, less new will turn up somewhere else in some allied or, nation where India or the US has a strategic presence. But I have no doubt in my mind that, of course, most of this is theatrics. At the end of the day, I'm going to say this: the tariffs were used more as an economic tool. Less as an economic tool. They have to be treated like more like a political tool, and they weren't treated politically. And because of that, they were scoring domestic points at home. But abroad, the most important thing that is going to be treated as the gold standard between the US, India, any nation that's an ally or seen as a partner for that regard, it's going to be trust. And optically, it may seem like trust has been eroded, but I can guarantee that even with the weapons trades and the deals that are coming, that are in negotiation stages between the US and India, this trust will never be fully eroded. There's too much at stake. There's too much at play, not only economically, geopolitically. And I am certain that both President Trump and Prime Minister Narendra Modi have some kind of agreement brewing in the background. I don't think 500% tariffs are going to actually be implemented. President Trump is very smart. He's very strategic. He knows what he's doing. And I think Narendra Modi knows at the end of the day that in the U.S. there is a long-term ally. And I don't see this falling apart. I see this being a short-term, let's say, hiccup.
This is the Greenland threat that we're seeing coming in. In fact, there are several statements that have come in of other world leaders. Let's take you through some of the statements regarding Justin Trudeau. Pleasure to have dinner with Governor Trudeau is what was stated by Donald Trump. Let's quickly bring in the next graphic plate in terms of what has been stated by President Trump for other leaders. Emmanuel Macron is another statement that we just saw coming in. We saw what has happened as far as Zelensky is concerned. You've done enough talking. You're not winning. This is a statement that we saw, of course, how that video went viral, in fact, a few months ago as well. Next set of statements as well, if you can quickly bring that in. If I can request my production team to bring us the next set of graphics as well in terms of the talking point when it comes to diplomacy and in terms of what Donald Trump has really said. Greenland is another very important point that has come in now. We've seen, of course, Trump talking about Greenland for some time. U.S. shares good ties with Denmark was the first statement that had come in. Strategically, it holds an interesting place, is what has been stated. Also, we are interested, we'll talk to Denmark, is what was stated back in August 2019. Cut to December 2024, calls were renewed. Ownership of Greenland is a necessity, is what Donald Trump then says. He says the purpose is national security and freedom across the world. There's also, of course, what's happened in January 2026, just a few days ago, talking about the potential. Donald Trump and his officials discussing a potential offer. What is likely to happen? Are there active discussions on buying Danish territory of Greenland that are currently underway? Of course, so we have seen very sharp reactions from Denmark itself. And when you talk about what has happened, for instance, in Venezuela, what are we possibly looking at in terms of what's likely to happen with Greenland? Mikkel is with us. Mikkel, I'd like to ask you, while Denmark itself has said there would be shoot-at-sight orders, all sorts of statements have come in from the side of Denmark as well. And we all know the strategic importance of, various routes, shipping routes, etc., as far as Greenland is concerned. What are we likely to see here? Are there some real fears after what we've seen happen in Venezuela? Mikkel.
Yeah, I think there absolutely is a lot of fear and concern in both Greenland and Denmark. I think that Mr. Trump's threats about military action, I think that military action is unlikely. But nevertheless, I think it's safe to say that for a small country like Denmark and Greenland, a loyal U.S. ally, Denmark had troops in Afghanistan and Iraq, lost a lot of people fighting alongside the U.S. I think there's this disbelief in Denmark that it would come to this, that the U.S. would treat a close ally in this manner.
You want to respond to that, Shane Trio? Why would U.S. treat a close ally, a NATO ally at that? And of course, we all know what happens as far as NATO is concerned. It's Article 5, if I'm not mistaken, where if one country is attacked, any other country can come in to support it. But here, this is clearly in violation of all existing understanding of NATO and international diplomacy. Shane?
Well, I saw that, NATO, Denmark and some of the countries in NATO were saying that if President Trump tries to annex Greenland, then, that'll be the end of NATO. The U.S. will be out of NATO. And, as a America First kind of guy, don't threaten me with a good time. That would not be the worst thing from my perspective. So the way I see it is, Greenland, they're a historic part of the North American continent. They already have a large U.S. military base. It's at the entrance of the Northwest Passage, the central trade route through the Arctic. So it makes a lot of sense, I think, for the U.S. to be showing an interest in Greenland, and I think it should be purchased peacefully, or you could just have the people vote on a referendum, let the people decide. So I think that the EU and NATO and these groups, they want, to have more control over the North American continent. President Trump with what he's calling the Don Roe doctrine that he's putting forward, he's making sure that, all interests are united in his hemisphere. So I think that's what we need. We need that to combat China and be able to keep our position as a world power in this.
Okay, Adele wants to respond to you on that.
So
Adele,
yes,
and then I want to bring in Glenn Grant as well. Adele first.
Thank you. So I just want to say absolutely, Shane, but ultimately we have to look at it from the global perspective of what matters. Water and rare earth elements. This is where it's at. This is the strategic next pivot, the next play. Whoever dominates water, whoever dominates the rare earth elements, they're going to win it. There's Venezuela, there's Greenland, and believe me, between those two, America's already gotten Iraq. There's a lot of stuff here, and ultimately, I think that America, it's in its best interest to have control over Greenland, strategically for what you said, but it isn't just about the—
Adele, what about sovereignty of those countries? Why does that always take a back seat?
You know what it is? You have to look at it this way. If America isn't doing it, it's going to be China, and it's going to be some other country by that matter. And I'm talking about it from the political perspective of what you're looking at from geopolitical leadership purview. And at the end of the day, I think most people would probably be a lot more comfortable under a strong America versus a stronger, let's say, other country dominating the Western Hemisphere.
Many heads that are nodding on this panel, but I want Glenn to come in on this. Glenn, from the NATO perspective and from the perspective of, exploiting resources, the big question is that many of these statements, developments, particularly Venezuela, to, of course, the threats of taking over Greenland, they are extremely problematic. And even the EU, I assume, would have serious issues with the positions that are being taken vis-a-vis Greenland.
I agree. And I think the last two speakers, I think their views are disgusting in a modern world. They may think that they're realistic, but if you have that, then all you're leading to is world war. Because if you don't have any rules anywhere, and the rule is who's the strongest, whether it's Adele, Shane, or someone else, then you're on your way towards, great power war. And we don't need this. Denmark owns Greenland. Greenland is Denmark. It's not just a separate country. And if America has rights for 17 bases in Greenland, of which they pulled back from having 17 bases. So they've got all the rights still. They still actually have the agreement for that. So there's no need for them to go any further. If what they just want is to steal things, then they should make it absolutely clear we're going to come and steal. Then the rest of the world will know what they're up against. Not just sort of lies, a security lie. There's no security issue. NATO is in Greenland, the same as everybody else, because America is there and other countries are there. So what we're looking at is Donald Trump and greed and his colleagues and greed. Power and greed. It's not America
I'd like to add something to that.
Okay, yeah, one by one. Many of you, I see many hands going up one by one. All right, Adele.
Shall we look at Britain in India? Shall we look at Britain in Africa? Shall we look at the history of your wonderful nation, which I absolutely love as an ally? I mean, let's be real here. Let's not be a hypocrite. I'm speaking facts. I'm telling you as it is. I'm not cherry picking and painting a rosy, flowery picture for any of our audience members. Anyone who has half a brain understands the reality of what's happening here. I'm not here to paint a pretty picture for you. I'm telling you the reality.
But Adele, if you don't respect the sovereignty of those countries, then it's colonialism, plain and simple, imperialism, plain and simple. And the international rules-based order does not allow for that.
Colonialism. I'm just speaking the truth about what is at stake here, where the world is heading, and what's going to be.
But if there is no, if attacking a sovereign country is par for course, then we are talking for a recipe for all sorts of disasters.
Attacking.
Let me bring in Sushant. Sushant, this is where the hypocrisy gets real. Because, when it comes to Venezuela, we want to corner the resources there. And they openly talk about controlling the revenue as far as the oil is concerned. Greenland, again, about rare earth and minerals. What are we really talking about today? Is there a international rules-based order? Are we just looking at greed? Insulting heads of state, heads of government is something that we've seen as something that's pretty much happened all along. What are we really talking about? Throwing all diplomatic norms to the wind.
So I think, Madhav, the one thing you cannot accuse the Americans of, at least this administration, is hypocrisy. They have said it openly. People like Stephen Miller and others have not made any bones about it. They've said it openly. We are going to go and we are going to capture your areas. We are going to decide how you are going to do business. Your resources are going to be ours. We are going to use that. And the irony, however, is that the Americans still fancy themselves as leaders of the free world. But this is a free world in which every other country is a colonized country or subjugated to America. So that is the big irony of the free world now. This is not the free world of the, of the Cold War period where there were these totalitarian regimes. This is a totalitarian colonial project in which countries are going to be subservient and be subjugated and enjoy a kind of a subsidiary alliance to the Americans. Now, they have not made any bones about it. I think it is all the other spin that people are putting on it, which becomes problematic. And I think that is where, we have to look. The problem, however, is that the Americans would have been able to get everything from their friends and their allies. Are you trying to tell me that Denmark would not would have resisted if the Americans wanted one or two bases or wanted to operationalize a few of the 17 odd bases that Mr. Grant is? They would not have said anything. They would have been more than happy to do this. Many other countries, maybe Venezuela is an outlier. And okay, fine, you have a problem out there. But this is not the way to do things. Because what it does is it ruins America's image in the world.
Absolutely.
Do you want friends and allies to have a very, very bad image of you and to be always suspicious and distrustful of you? How does that help you?
And there's another aspect of it, not just the respect, not just the distrust, but also you're now setting a precedent for other countries. You were saying that this is what China would do. Now China has a very clear license to do this. And what moral authority do you have to lecture to Russia when it attacks Ukraine, or even China if it tomorrow decides to go ahead and capture Taiwan? Angie Wong?
But China has been
Look, these are not boots on the ground. We're not sending military into Greenland to do anything. In fact, Trump is saying, hey, everyone in Greenland, how about I give you $100,000? Would you then declare your independence? This is so different. You're framing it in a way where we're imperialists. No, that is completely false. And it is disgusting that the panelists here are saying that we would do that. We're trying to make a deal here. We want the polar Silk Road.
May I ask you a counter to that, Angie? May I ask you a counter to that? If tomorrow you offer $100,000 and China offers $500,000, you'll be okay with that? China wins?
If the citizens want it and they declare their independence, and Denmark has long said that Greenland is independent.
What are we talking about, Mikhail?
Throughout history.
Mikhail,
Mikhail,
do you find that problematic? I find it problematic for multiple reasons, but let's hear it from Mikhail.
Yes, okay, I need to put some things straight here. First of all, I completely agree with some of the other panelists saying that the U.S. could have gotten everything it wants in terms of having its security interests taken care of by just asking nicely. And secondly, I must stress that no poll shows that the Greenlandic people should be interested in being part of the U.S. They have repeatedly stressed that they don't want to be part of the U.S.
Done where they were interested in being.
They don't want to be part of the U.S. There you go, Angie Wong.
No,
I think you got your answer.
They absolutely do. There were definitely polls taken. Don't rewrite
That's your
history.
perception, ma'am. It's one perception versus the other. But let me bring in fact, Dr. Sergey Markov. Dr. Sergey Markov, U.S. takeover of Greenland, practical?
I got to get going, guys.
Impractical? What's your view? How will Russia respond to that, if at all?
First of all, of course, we are glad to have any conflict between Europe and United States of America. More conflict between them, more Western coalition weak, more security and prosperity for all other world. Because now the main threat to the all countries is imperialism of the Western countries. So everybody in India and in China and Russia should applaud any conflict between America and Europe. It's first. Secondly, we will look at the Greenland from point of view of justice. It's more realistic that Greenland should be as Antarctica under the control of the United Nations. And all countries should have right to use these resources with respect of each other.
Right.
We doesn't like if Greenland colony of Denmark, but at the same time, we doesn't like if Greenland colony of the United States of America. Greenland should be independent under the control of United Nations.
Right. Let me quickly bring in Dr. Ashok Sajanar as well. Mr. Sajanar, many in India are of the view, yes, we've been very mature. Unlike the hotheads, the motor mouths that we've seen, talking from the United States side, including senior officials there, Indian ministers, Indian Prime Minister, etc., and even the MEA statement today has been extremely measured so as to not be provocative. But the question is, how long are we going to maintain this composed silence? Because the silence or the maturity should not be mistaken for weakness.
No, definitely it should not be taken for weakness. And I think we are, as far as, not all diplomacy, I'm sure everyone here understands, is not conducted through the press. It's not conducted through media. It is not conducted by speaking out loud. There are channels of communication, and I'm sure though all those channels, Madhav, are being worked. Since I come to that point, let me say that the comments made by any of the panelists here that Indian diplomacy has not worked well, totally uncalled for, unwarranted, gratuitous. Because if the Indian diplomacy has not been able to see what was coming, the whole world has not been able to see what was coming. Even our friend from Denmark also said, it came as a shock. Then you would have to change not only the Indian ambassador in Washington, D.C., you would have to change all the foreign ministers and all the leaders in the world because no one saw it coming. That having been said, it dawned upon us what is the issue, we have handled it very maturely. And we continue to handle it very maturely. And I'm sure, as one of the panelists said, we will come to that point when...
All right. When will we come to that point? Will India-US ties survive all of this turbulence, all of the global order, or the disorder rather globally that we're seeing? I'll have to thank all our panelists for joining us. Sushant Sareen, Ashok Sajanar, Dr. Sergey Markov, Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Grant, Adele Nazarian, Shane Trio, Angie Wong, and Mikhail Ringolson. Thank you so much for joining us in this edition of the National Debate.